Chosen one, lock your attention on what I'm about to say and do not move. That feeling you've been carrying, the one that makes you wonder if you went too far, if you broke something that was supposed to hold, stop running from it. Face it, because what I'm about to tell you is going to reframe everything you thought you understood about what happened. The enemy has been working overtime this week for one reason and one reason only. He knows what your disruption just set in motion. It all ends tomorrow. The confusion, the second-guessing, the isolation that followed when the crowd dispersed. But here is what you need to understand right now. It is not ending in spite of what you did. It is ending because of it. Think back to that moment. The moment you stopped playing by their rules. Maybe you said the thing you were told to keep quiet. Maybe you walked away from a structure that everyone around you called safe, called necessary, called the only way. You stood there watching it shake, watching it crack, watching people scatter in every direction. And some part of you whispered, "What did I just do?" You didn't know it then, but that disruption was not destruction. That was a demolition order signed in heaven before you were born. You did not break what was supposed to stand. You broke what was never supposed to stay. You did not find this message by accident. The algorithm did not bring you here. The Holy Spirit did. This is a divine appointment that was written into the timeline long before you clicked play. You are standing at a threshold that millions ran past because they were too afraid to stop. Stay until the very last second of this message. In the next few minutes, I am going to hand you the legal decree that separates your identity from the wreckage they left behind when they ran. I am going to walk you through the exact audit that shows you where your greatest act of courage got mislabeled as your greatest mistake. And, at the end, I am going to give you the declaration that seals this chapter permanently, so the accuser cannot drag you back into the courtroom over something heaven already ruled on. Do not click away. Your future self is begging you to stay, because if you leave now, you leave before you hear the verdict. And the verdict is the reason you survived the collapse. My name is Zerekiel. I've spent years studying the hidden patterns of the spirit realm. The warfare, the awakening, the weapons most people are never taught to use. And I've walked over 10,000 chosen ones through their moment of breakthrough. If this is your first time here, subscribe and hit the notification bell right now. Not because I need the numbers, but because the next message I release might be the one that was written specifically for the war you're fighting tomorrow. I know what the last 72 hours have felt like. The atmosphere has not just been quiet, it has been disorienting. Like standing in the middle of a field where a storm just passed and not knowing if you should move or wait. Maybe you have been replaying it on a loop, the moment things shifted. Maybe you were lying in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning this week, staring at the ceiling, running the sequence back frame by frame, trying to identify the exact second where you could have chosen differently. Or maybe you found yourself sitting in complete silence, surrounded by people who used to fill the room with sound, realizing they were gone. And the silence was louder than anything they ever said when they were present. You feel exposed, like you are standing in an open field where a structure used to be, and now everyone can see exactly where you stood, and exactly what you did, and exactly how many people left because of it. And in that exposure, the enemy has started whispering a very specific lie. He is telling you that the reason millions ran is because you were wrong. He is replaying the moment the system cracked. He is pointing at every face that turned away, every voice that went silent, every door that closed after the collapse. And he is building his case. He is telling you that a true, chosen one would have built something that held. He is telling you that real leaders don't cause collapse. He is telling you that what you called breakthrough, history is going to call ruin. But I need you to hear what the scripture actually says about this moment. Isaiah 43:19 says, "Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." Listen to that. A new thing does not spring forth from what was already standing. It springs from the place where the old thing came down. The wilderness is not the punishment. The wilderness is the construction zone. The desert is not where the river is absent. It is where the river is being rerouted. What collapsed was not your future. What collapsed was the container that was too small to hold what God put inside you. The millions who ran were not rejecting you. They were being removed. There is a difference between people leaving in anger and heaven clearing the space. What looked like abandonment was a divine audit. What felt like isolation was a security clearance. Not everyone who was standing next to you when the system cracked was meant to be standing next to you when the new one rises. The heaviness you feel is not the weight of failure. It is the weight of what comes next. It is the gravitational pull of a destiny that is enormous enough to have shaken an entire system just by the force of your obedience. You did not go too far. You went exactly as far as you were sent. And the collapse you triggered, the one that sent millions running, that was not the ending. That was the beginning. What collapsed was the container. But you are still standing. And what's about to be poured into you cannot fit into what just broke. That is not a consolation. That is a legal declaration from the court of heaven. And if something stirred deep in your spirit just now, you may be ready to receive the chosen one's mantle. This sacred guide reveals the 12 divine codes behind your calling, your suffering, and your destiny. The codes that turn the life heaven already wrote over you into the life you actually walk. The link is in the first pinned comment, but only for a limited time. Now stay with me, because what comes next is what most people never get to hear. You have been calling this a crisis. Heaven has been calling it a coronation. And that gap, that vast, disorienting gap between what your eyes are reporting and what the Spirit is actually doing, that is the gap where most chosen ones quit. Not because they are weak, but because no one told them that the silence after the collapse is not a sign that God went quiet. It is a sign that He already spoke, and everything is now rearranging itself to align with what He said. Think about what happened to Elijah after Mount Carmel. This was a man who had just called fire down from heaven in front of an entire nation. He watched false prophets fall. He watched the rain return after 3.5 years of drought. He ran with supernatural strength. And then, within hours of his greatest triumph, he was lying under a tree asking God to take his life, telling God he was the only one left, feeling more alone after his greatest victory than he had ever felt in his greatest struggle. And what did God do? He did not give Elijah a strategy. He did not hand him a roadmap. He sent an angel to feed him and said, "The journey is too great for you. Rest, eat, because what is coming requires a strength you do not yet have." The isolation you are sitting in right now is not rejection. It is preparation for a journey that is too great for the version of you that existed before the collapse. But here is where it goes deeper, because what Elijah did not realize, what he could not see from under that tree, is that there were 7,000 in Israel who had never bowed the knee to Baal. 7,000 who were still standing, still chosen, still positioned. He thought the collapse had left him alone. But the collapse had actually separated him from the noise long enough for God to show him who was still there. The crowd dispersing was not the end of the army. It was the thinning of it. The kind of divine reduction that always precedes an upgrade in assignment. And this is the thing most people miss entirely. God does not always add to your life before a breakthrough. Sometimes He subtracts. Sometimes He removes. Sometimes He allows an entire structure to come down, not to leave you exposed, but to clear the line of sight between you and the people who are always supposed to be standing there. What you are calling absence might be alignment in disguise. Now, once you understand that, you are ready for something that goes even further. Because it is not just about who left. It is about what you believed when they left. When that crowd ran, a verdict was handed to you by the enemy. And many of you, if you are honest, accepted it. Not because you lack faith, but because the evidence was overwhelming. The faces, the silence, the doors, the messages that stopped coming. And so the enemy did not need to fight you. He simply needed you to prosecute yourself. He handed you the charges, and you took the bench. This is what he does at the moment of highest activation. He does not show up with obvious opposition. He shows up dressed as your own inner voice. He sounds like discernment. He sounds like humility. He sounds like reflection. And what he says is this: maybe you moved too fast. Maybe you misread the signal. Maybe what you called God was just ambition wearing a spiritual robe. He makes the accusation sound reasonable, makes the arrest feel justified. And coming up in just a moment, there is one shift in perception that dismantles every charge he has filed. But first, this has to land. You are not on trial. The trial is over. Romans 8:1 does not say there is therefore reduced condemnation. It does not say there is manageable condemnation for those who are mostly walking in the Spirit. It says there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. None. Not some. Not a little. None. Which means the courtroom the enemy keeps dragging you back into is a courtroom that no longer has jurisdiction over your life. He is filing appeals in a case that was already dismissed. And every time you agree with the accusation, you are walking into a courthouse that heaven permanently closed. The question is not whether you were wrong to disrupt the system. The question is whether you are willing to stop attending a trial that God already ruled on. And here is the shift that changes everything. The thing most people never realize is that disruption is not a side effect of the chosen one's calling. It is the calling. Jesus did not come to maintain the religious infrastructure of his time. He came and immediately began overturning tables, healing on Sabbath, eating with sinners, touching lepers, speaking to women at wells in ways that shattered every cultural boundary in place. Every person of power and position looked at what he was doing and called it reckless, called it divisive, called it dangerous. The Pharisees were not villains in their own minds. They were guardians of what they believed God had built. And to them, Jesus looked like someone tearing it down. But destruction and disruption are not the same thing. Destruction leaves nothing. Disruption leaves a clearing. And what Jesus was doing, what you have been doing, is not the work of someone tearing God's house down. It is the work of someone clearing the ground where God's house is actually going to be built. Stay with me, because coming up, the hidden weight that has been slowing everything down. And it is not what you think it is. The shift from confusion to clarity does not come all at once. It comes layer by layer. And the next layer is this: the people who left were not equipped for what is coming. This is not arrogance. This is not judgment. It is discernment. There are people who are built for the season of construction, and people who are built for the season of occupation. The ones who walked away in the collapse were not necessarily disloyal. Many of them were simply not assigned to what comes next. And God, in His mercy, released them before they became anchors, before their fear of the new could become a chain on your acceleration. You had to lose them to move at the speed that your next season requires. And this leads to the part of the message that most teachers skip, because it requires them to say something uncomfortable. The thing that has been slowing you down is not the enemy's opposition. It is your loyalty to a version of your life that God already finished. You have been grieving a season that heaven completed. You have been trying to resurrect something that God buried on purpose. You have been standing at the tomb of the old assignment, weeping, asking God to roll the stone back. And God has been standing behind you, pointing at the road ahead, saying it is not here. He is risen. The assignment moved. And so must you. This is what the disciples did not understand on the road to Emmaus. They were walking away from Jerusalem, heads down, hearts broken, rehearsing the story of what they had lost. They had built their entire identity around a version of the calling that they thought they understood. And when that version collapsed, they did not know how to reframe what had happened. They called him a prophet. They said they had hoped he was the one, past tense, had hoped, because when the structure fell, they reached for past tense without realizing that what God was building could not be accessed from that posture. The stranger who walked beside them on that road opened the scriptures and reframed everything. And it was only in the reframing, only when they could see the collapse as part of the plan rather than evidence against it, that their eyes were opened. And they recognized him. Your collapse is not evidence against the plan. It is embedded in it. But let me challenge you with something, because we are entering the part of this message where the real confrontation begins. You have been waiting for the feeling to return. That specific feeling. The one you had when the assignment first felt clean, when the confirmation was clear, when the path was illuminated and the weight of it felt like privilege instead of pressure. You have been waiting for that feeling to come back as evidence that you are still on track. And what no one has told you is this: that feeling is not coming back. Not because you outgrew the feeling. What God is asking you to walk into now requires a different kind of faith. Not the faith of the beginning, which is carried by wonder and confirmation, but the faith of the middle. The kind that has no goosebumps, no spectacular signs, no applause. Just the raw, quiet, undecorated trust of someone who has seen enough to know that God is still building even when everything looks demolished. This is the faith of Abraham after he put the wood on Isaac's back. He did not feel good. He did not have clarity. He had obedience, and it was counted as righteousness not because of how it felt, but because of what he did with how it felt. And what's about to come next will likely surprise you, because it always does. The thing that has been blocking you is not the enemy. It is not your past. It is not the people who left. It is the story you have been telling yourself about what qualified you. Because somewhere in the silence of the last 72 hours, you began believing that your disruption disqualified you. And that belief, quiet, sophisticated, wrapped in spiritual language, has been the real agent of delay. It sounds like humility. It sounds like self-awareness. It sounds like taking responsibility. But what it actually is a counterfeit. Because true humility does not shrink from an assignment God has already authorized. True humility steps into it, trembling, and obeys anyway. What you have been calling humility is fear that learned to speak in religious tones. And until you name it, until you call it what it actually is, it will continue to wear the costume of wisdom and block every step forward you try to take. Here is the part you probably did not expect. The disruption was not your act of courage. The disruption was the test. Your act of courage is what comes next. Anyone can break something, even by accident. But to stand in the rubble, look at the sky, and say, "I trust what you are building here." To do that, without the applause, without the confirmation, without the crowd, that is the courage heaven has been waiting to see. That is the moment the chosen one stops being chosen in theory and starts walking in authority in practice. The collapse was not the threshold. This moment, right now, the choice you make in the next 24 hours about whether you step forward or retreat into the grief of what fell, this is the threshold. And what waits on the other side of it is not a return to what was. It is the arrival of what was always supposed to be. You did not break what was supposed to stand. You broke what was never supposed to stay. And the ground underneath the rubble is not ruined ground. It is consecrated ground. And what God plants in consecrated ground does not grow slowly. It breaks through. Place your hand on your heart right now and speak this over yourself. I release the verdict the enemy tried to hand me. I release the grief of what fell, knowing it fell because it was finished, not because I failed. I release the need to explain what God ordained. I release the loyalty I have been carrying to a season that heaven already closed. I receive the identity that was never determined by the crowd, the structure, or the collapse. I receive the authority to stand in the rubble and call it a foundation. I receive the faith that does not require a feeling to move forward. I step into the assignment that the disruption was designed to open. I am not disqualified. I am positioned. I am not abandoned. I am prepared. I am not the wreckage. I am the one who walks out of it. And nothing the accuser files against me can overturn what heaven has already ruled. The verdict is not coming. The verdict is here. And it says chosen. It says authorized. It says now. If this message confirmed what your spirit already knew, do not let it end here. Share this with someone who is standing in their rubble right now and does not yet know it is a foundation. Leave a comment below with the word threshold. Just that one word. So I know you made it to the end, and so I know you stepped through. And subscribe, because the next message I release will carry the specific instruction for what you build on this consecrated ground. I will see you there.